Hello, everyone. Welcome to
Hi.
yet another podcast. Here with you.
And yet another reveal.
Yeah. We're gonna make you wait a little bit this time on this reveal. I want to be a little bit cheeky for a change. But as a trade, I won't be upset when one of you inevitably clips the image for the card and posts in the Discord. So let's see who wins this time.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for Lionel. He just you need to cope with it for just a little longer.
I promise, though, we're going to try to have an interesting discussion. And the discussion actually does have something to do with what the title is. And I think that when you think about how the title ties together with what our preview card is, you'll maybe have appreciated the ride. If not, well, you probably disliked the whole concept we're talking about anyway for this. So
But I think you'll be fine.
I don't know. Some people seem to act like they're definitely not fine with some of this.
Yeah. In any case, I would say let's get started with your first point.
Indeed. Well, first, we have to roll an intro. Yeah, so let's talk about what we're here for, but not the Hecata preview first. Let's talk about how Oblivion did nothing wrong, and I don't understand why all of you have so much haterade for it. Now, I know hate is an essential part of most people's desire, but hate is not the only thing we should think on, right? I know you miss necromancy and you miss obtenebration. They were very one-dimensional disciplines that allowed you to control shadows or manipulate and create the undead. These are really simple conceptual ideas, and it seems like you should just have these things. Why blend them together? Why not keep them separate? They work so much better separately, right? You would agree, right, Jan? Separate is better always.
Yes, and I'm just having a check at the look at the chat for a moment, and people are asking what is meant by hate, and we don't hate it. We just love how it's done, and we love the card we're going to show you, even though it's not an Oblivion card. But at least in the Discord, there has been some chatter about folks who want to, I don't know, do the exact same thing it did, like the old disciplines did before, or just like whenever a new card comes out which has Oblivion, reaction is often like meh, which I don't feel like is right.
Yeah,
So
it's really not, because at the end of the day, both disciplines are very narrow disciplines. But when we look at Oblivion as a discipline, Oblivion unites these two disciplines and connects it to so many more things beyond just manipulating shadows or bringing up and down the undead. In fact, in some ways, well, I've heard a lot of this complaint about, well, why did the Giovanni and the Harbingers and well, I don't ever remember the Samedi. Why are they like forcing these people together? And honestly, like, well, they all felt different. You get into this case of like, well, why is Thanatosis so different than necromancy? How does it really differ in any way? It's just like an adaptation. But when you look at Oblivion, Oblivion is this thing that allows you to take on a lot of different things at one time. Now, I am disappointed. If we want to talk about like where maybe there's a developmental flaw in the whole Oblivion concept, we could talk about how really what is obtenebration and what is necromancy. Well, they're both kind of like amalgam disciplines. Obtenebration is having domination over the powers that Oblivion gives you. It's controlling and manipulating shadows, pulling things to do whatever your deeds are. And what is necromancy? Well, it's instilling life or some measure of toughness beyond death into a creature. The choice to kind of not turn these into amalgams, and this is not a BCP problem, this is above the BCP level, is kind of an interesting thing. But that's not a fault of Oblivion. Oblivion still does conceptually what you want it to do. It encompasses a lot of things which give one discipline as an option to many different clans that is going to open up doors for a lot of developmental choices. And I'm hoping one of the things that we want to talk about in an upcoming podcast is that this discipline is going to become more of an amalgam discipline. We're going to see, what does Auspex do when blended with Oblivion? What does this discipline do when blended with Oblivion? I want to see more of the amalgam cards. I think that's going to be one of the biggest thing that we're going to see overall.
Yeah, and we asked if we could do a preview on a amalgam card, which we, as I said, it's not an Oblivion card. We won't have an amalgam too, but I think amalgams as a concept are quite interesting because it does open up a lot of design space.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of over the history of this game. I've heard a lot of like this feeling of, well, how much can you really do with this discipline or that discipline? But we've seen some of the stuff done in the past with amalgams, and some of that felt really good. And we've seen like that there are amalgam stuff that exists. But I'll save that for another podcast episode, one I think we'll really enjoy getting to do when we get around to it. But for now, yeah, you got one more thing you want to say?
No, I just wanted to say people have to bear with me now.
Yeah, well,
until yeah.
I put together a slideshow, so clearly I'm encouraging this idea. But of course, we both enjoy V5 and what it can do for player bases and for the game itself. So let's move on to focusing on what new cards we're getting for V5 that are reprints of old cards into the V5 metagame.
Yeah, and the first one, like I'm gonna do this real quick, but I think all of them are worth mentioning and helping to flesh out the format even further. The first one is Channel 10. Like, it's another one of these media locations which help give you more intercept, either you or maybe even cross table. And I think,
although this one's just you for this one specifically, but yeah, it's a minion you control.
Damn it.
Yep.
Destroys my whole new gameplay. But I think having reprinted this, considering there are a lot of allies in the deck, is quite good. So you could add up what's it? The radio, whatever.
Yeah, WMRH.
Yeah,
I like how that's the thing I remember. I remember the 4-letter acronym. I've been missing words all day, but WMRH, yeah, got that one.
Yeah, so I think it might indicate that the deck as a whole goes into a somewhat toolboxy or even blocky direction.
Yeah, I would agree. And that goes along with the next card. If you're going to have a toolbox, you're going to need a way to pay for that toolbox.
And that's the Coven. Like, in the discussions I have had on Discord, like, that's one of the cards which gets a mention in what's missing for V5. So, very nice card. I don't need to explain it to you all.
Yeah.
It's just
the right card to be reprinted for this, indeed. The last one, though, is a little more interesting. I was honestly surprised this got a reprint.
Yeah, just like Perfectionist. Hold on. It's like another of the archetypes, but once each turn, this vampire can gain 1 blood after performing a successful action during which no reaction cards are played. And I think this might be very interesting for a lot of decks, but for Hecata in specific, because maybe even for La Sombra too, because I don't think everyone wants to block them all the time.
I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of circumstances where people aren't going to want to. What I really consider the most powerful aspect of Perfectionist is the way that oftentimes it is a hunt for two. It's so frequent that people won't block a hunt action, especially if it's not necessarily going to dunk a vampire or change the tempo. So if you've got one or two blood on a vampire and a Perfectionist, you're often going to get a hunt to happen, and that means you're going up 2 blood, which means you're never really going to get there. But really, you don't want to get into combat, punch a guy who's just going to do the same thing again and have to waste resources on it. So I think this card is I think the card is a little boring because the way it's played isn't kind of the design of the card. To me, a Perfectionist isn't just like, oh yeah, I went out hunting and I knew no one was going to pay attention, and so like I got an extra bite to eat doing it.
But it's a card which might be interesting for my Nosferatu.
Yeah, because they're going to do a lot of actions that nobody's going to pay attention to, because most of them are going to not affect anyone but their prey.
And speaking of Nosferatu,
yeah, speaking of, we'll get to our preview card, and it does have something to do with Nosferatu, because it takes some of the best parts of 2 cards that Nosferatu might play.
Yeah, one of the cards is a card I tried to build a deck around for I don't know, 2 years maybe, or 1.5, but like forever. Creeping Sabotage, and I do like its design, but
it's just it's expensive, it's action consumptive. You just this card feels like it should be a game-winning card, but you need to have like 20 Nosferatu out putting the card into play, but then they won't be able to play it after the 4th one gets put into play. So what are you going to do then, right? You're just hoping that you can block, and the only person that's going to be blocking should be your prey. But oftentimes you get these like crazy cross-table agreements where I'm so weak, please help me out, cross-table player, and you don't want to get in a fight with what is also your cross-table ally. But the other card that I think is really missing, one other card that I think that like the V5 especially, Nosferatu, could really benefit from playing would be a card like Constant Revolution, the other card that is kind of seen in this card we're about to preview, because it does have a more statically and growing effect that's going on every turn. But it does affect everyone at the table, which means that everyone at the table has more of a vested interest in putting an end to it.
Yeah.
But what if a card like Constant Revolution didn't just affect the whole table, but only affected your prey? And that's going to bring us to our card,
which is called Gates of Aggro.
So this is a Hecata exclusive action at 1 stealth that is unique. You put into play with 1 counter, and during your unlock phase, you can put a counter on the card. During your Praise unlock phase, for each counter on the card, they burn 1 pool or remove a library card at random in their ash heap from the game. Hecata you control with capacity 4 or more can add an additional counter to this card as a +1 stealth action, and vampires can burn this card as a D action.
So, and if you look at the card, I think when I first saw it, I had the impulse on like, this is something I want to build a deck on, because I feel like it's much more action efficient compared to Creeping Sabotage. Like, it gets a counter on, it affects your prey immediately in their turn.
And it does the thing that Creeping does, where you can build on it yourself via extra actions.
Yeah, exactly. But you don't have to pay for it, like in the adding up amount for Creeping Sabotage. So, and I think it is a card which might feel like completely whatever at first, because we are all not used to using our ash heap for anything. Like, a bit of recursion, sure, but if you don't have Asher tablets in your deck, normally you don't care.
Yeah, but we're getting a card that does that, aren't we, Jan?
Yeah, we do.
We're getting Shroud of Decay, in fact.
And Shroud is like, I feel the synergy between those two is something which is really nice to do because you can have Gates of Acheron in play. It just people will just discard the ash heap, um, and nobody will bother burning pool unless you force them to. And
Mm-hmm.
this is what Shroud of Decay does on Superior. Um, so I mean, this is sure if you bleed with shrouds, they can even discard. But I think there is a if you're at that point where you need you need to build up 7 cards to use the superior effect, if I understand it correctly,
Mm-hmm.
right, Steve?
Correct.
So there's it might be a hard thing to balance, but I think timing it right is just adding another counter to uh, just like forcing people to pay, like your prey to pay for Gates of Acheron, while the others can just happily discard from the ash heap,
Yeah.
which will help you setting up for later.
Yeah, I think there's a heavy synergy that's being built here too. Part of why I wanted to mention Revelations here is I think what we're looking at is BCP finally starting to build a true kind of version of what would be called in some other games of a control deck, right? We're used to seeing, the Harbingers end up in a kind of toolboxy strategy that has some blocking. You've got the big, the big 11 cap, put a bunch of equipment on a guy to do a bunch of heavy blocking, but then those tend to end up drawing out to these very long, like extensive games where a player is like hoping they can manage to steal away a victory point or two, but keeping the table from like ending up completely stalemated, just enough, but needing to keep it also in that stalemate to make sure they make it to the end. But this allows for a much more interesting kind of control-y strategy, the strategy of put a little pressure with bleeds, fill the graveyard a bit, or fill the ash heap a bit, then pick a few key cards out of the player's hand, or keep an eye on what the player is playing. And then as you kind of start manipulating that and you're filling the graveyard, you've got this shroud that you can, kind of put a little more pressure on now with the superior version because you've managed to peel some cards from them. And think about it just in principle, right? In either sense of Shroud of Decay, you're going to steal 1 to 3 cards from that player. You're either going to get a wake or some method of being able to intercept, or you're going to get whatever they might play in combat, or if they're going to play a bounce. You're always going to be getting some amount of value, regardless of how you use Shroud of Decay. And then you slam down of Gates of Acheron
Yeah.
when they are not like ready for being able to burn the cards, or maybe they have like 5 or 6 cards in their ash heap and they throw one more down there because now they've got or they're trying to keep themselves from that 7th one reaching the ash heap. But then you throw down the gate and they're like, oh, I'm fine, I've got a few turns, like I don't have to worry about the gate anymore. But then you start throwing the shroud at them a little bit and they think like, oh yeah, I should just take it because discarding the cards doesn't matter. And before they know it, the gate is very large and literally burning them out of the game.
And we didn't talk about that, like 5 or higher caps can add a counter to it in a clan which has access to fortitude.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do Shroud of Decay, which doesn't cost blood. You can do and then you can try to put a counter on the Gate of Acheron. So you can just build up the pressure steadily. But defending it might be hard, and this is where you also see some synergy with all the allies we've gotten.
Correct.
Because like I think you might need to focus on either one of the angles during deck building. But if you got some aggressive corpse in play who can maybe rush back, so you don't need to take an action.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm seeing the
It
argument I
might help.
expected for this to come up, by the way, in the chat real quick, which is that, well, with the Shroud and with the Gate, they don't really work for each other, because if you're removing the cards from the Gate, you're turning off the Shroud. But you're never turning off Shroud. That's my point. Shroud is always active in either form. If they spend their resources to burn Gate, that's great for you, because now you can use the cards that Gate isn't removing to kill them with Shroud. And if they do choose to let the Gate stay online, well, you're also putting on bleed pressure on them that, sure, is feeding the Gate, but they have to deal with the fact that they're taking the bleed pressure.
Yeah, and I think even discarding, like, which is counter-effective to Gates of Acheron on first sight, um, really isn't, because if you can put like 4 counters on there each turn or 3, that is a lot. And
Yeah.
even if somebody's discarding from 2 bleeds,
And if
it
your
doesn't
mind
really
is
matter
set
because
on burning cards over and over and over again, you're not going to have any cards to play very quickly.
yeah. So I mean, we're both not in playtest, so we don't know if it really does function that well. But it does open up a really controlling playstyle for a clan, which I think is fit for it.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a very exciting card to see what happens with it. I think it's going to see a good amount of play. I think it's going to produce a very interesting kind of deck design. There's still a few other cards that haven't quite been spoiled yet that I think are going to be really exciting and may or may not play into this. I also think it's going to be very interesting when eventually we see what the new blood decks are going to bring to it as well. I feel like I've been really excited for every new blood deck that comes out, because every one of these sets that come out, we get these really interesting ideas and decks going, and then we get like this extra little like glaze of something delicious on top when the new blood decks drop, that just take something that's already feeling pretty good and make it just right. And I feel like that's what we're going to see more of once we see the rest of these cards, and especially once we see the new blood stuff come out.
Yeah, and I do think, like, talking about Hecata being fleshed out or not, they're certainly not fleshed out in the sense of having all possible options, but I think they do have a very viable one with the deck alone.
Yeah. All in all, I'm really excited about this. I was very worried that when they were first talking about like the redesign and all this stuff for Hecata, I was very worried that we were going to get a clan that was going to feel like too blended, too overlapping on top of itself, too many different things trying to go on at the same time. But instead, like, what we're getting is this very different flavor of a cohesive unit kind of being formed, that are pieces of these ideas but still being like their own altogether. And it means I'm really excited for like what this means for the game in general. I've been very impressed so far. Look, I want to talk more shit about BCP, and I feel like I gave them a lot when we went with our first podcast episode, where we basically just like, we're not the biggest fans of Follow London. But I gotta say, like, I'm feeling with every set like we are getting some really, really good, balls hit out of the park here, even though I hate baseball. It's a very, very like good direction that they're going, and it shows that they're trying to make sure their thinking isn't just in the box we all expect. We're not just getting the game that we've seen before and we've played before.
And I do think that's a good thing, because, like, I mean, I've been saying it in various other circumstances, but VTES has been, like, not really dead, but not evolving for quite a while, like before it got into reprint, and now it's just something which forces all of us to think about different decks, new ideas. I think that's what makes the game interesting and keeps me playing it.
Yeah.
At least.
So I'd like to thank, first of all, BCP for giving us the opportunity to show you guys this card. I'd like to thank all of you for being here to check out what we had to spoil. I have really been enjoying these kind of things where we get to talk about this in detail a little ahead of it actually seeing play. It's a nice, fun thing to get to let us do, and it's also really nice to see you guys having some comments in here and giving us your own thoughts on it. We look forward to reading some of what you guys talk about in the Discord to come.
Yeah, and for whoever doesn't know what the Gates of Acheron are, by the way, I didn't know it actually. It's the Acheron is a river in Greece, which is a river to which death people are carried over into the underworld. I always thought it was Styx, but apparently it's Acheron as well. So it's like the gates to the underworld.
Yep.
So that being said,
and that's why it's getting rid of everything that's already been gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you guys so much again for your time. We look forward to more of these in the future, and ideally this year we'll have a few more podcast episodes coming out. We're not trying to do only spoiler podcasts. Jan and I have just had really poor schedules in trying to sync them up lately. So,
but we've set us some date already.
Yeah.
So hope to see you around soon.
Yep. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.